Hi everybody, welcome back to the Dice Must Flow, and today we're going to take a look at the new Warhammer Age of Sigmar Battletome for Death, the Legions of Nagash. So I'm a big Death player, well I should say I'm a Tomb King player, so I have a lot of Death models, and I was kind of excited to see all the changes that are coming out in the Legions of Nagash. So let's go ahead and take a look at the book. So the basic first part of this is background about how Nagash is the Lord of Undeath. And most of this really just goes into the story or the background that sums up how Nagash is basically upset that people are stealing souls from him. And they go into basically because of Stormcast Eternals being reforged, that's souls that are being stolen. Because of the elves and the god of Slaanesh basically sated on a bunch of elvish souls. He didn't get those. And then even talking about the Mirrored City Shadespire, how they had shade glass, which prevented them. And here they, like I said, they call Sigmar the soul thief. And here's the story about the souls of the elf kind that were stolen. And so Nagash has, like I said, is upset about this. Also in the book they talk about how Nagash was defeated in Nagashizar. His capital was razed eons ago, and then about how his Motarchs saved him, and he is rebuilding. So then they go into the realm of death and talk about Shyish a little bit. And then basically they're going to start talking about the legions of Nagash. You have the Legion of Night, which is led by Manfred von Karsten. And you have the Legion of Sacrament, which is led by Arkan the Black. And you have the Legion of Blood, which is led by Neferata. And here they basically talk about also the blood-mad ghoul kings of the Flesh Eater Corps fight alongside Nagash, but they're unpredictable allies. So they're basically not part of a Legion of Nagash. And there's some effects about that later on we'll talk about. So the book goes into the Legacy of Darkness, and kind of this page sort of sums up all of the history. And it talks about how the Shyish, or the control of Nagash, was invaded by Tzeentch, how it was invaded by Khorne, and how it was invaded by Nurgle. And then you have the betrayal by Sigmar, and so all of this led to the fall of his city. And you can see why he is upset, because basically you've had the Chaos Gods attacking him, and his quote-unquote lawful friend, people attacking him. And so he sets out on a scheme to take control and bring a perfectly lawful world with no chaos and no mortals to mess it up. So then we go into some background, and they talk about Neferata and Manfred van Karsten, both of which are vampires, and they each leads one of the Motarchs, or one of the legions of Nagash. And then Arkan the Black, who is Nagash's trusty right-hand man, the guy who is probably the most trusted of Nagash. They go into the Morghast, which are powerful units, the finest of Nagash's undead creations. And basically give some history, basically here on vampires, different, and the units all used by them. So basically later on there will be war scrolls for these, but like it just gives a little bit of history about fell bats and what they are, or bat swarms, or what a Vargeist is. And so that's useful instead of just kind of trying to read a scroll. Kind of interesting little backgrounds. And then they call it the Night Haunt spirits, and they're going to do the same thing with the Wraiths, the Banshees, the Black Coach, Spirit Hosts. And then finally the Death Rattle Legions. So we get the White Kings, the Black Knights, the Graveguard, and the Skeletal Warriors. And they talk about, again, what each of these are and who they serve or how they work. Finally, they get into Death Mages and Dead Walkers, which are the Dire Wolves. They talk about the Mortis Engine and Necromancers. Next up was the monsters, basically, behemoths. So you got the Terrorgeist and the Zombie Dragon. And again, background for that. So then they get into Armies of the Dead, and we're just treated to a whole bunch of heavy metal paintings here. As you can see, Nagash basically and his Morghast. And a nice vampire or skeletal army here. And they've really got some nice background how they stuff in here. They really upped their game on how to do some of these pictures and merging in, I guess, with Photoshop and stuff, and like the different, you can see like a different realm in the background here. So again, we got all this great stuff from heavy metal in this book. You can see kind of a diorama here. It's pretty cool. More detail on Nagash and Manfred. More detail on each of the miniatures there. They talk about the Twilight Scourge, which is a Manfred von Karsten Legion. So next up is something that I thought was great, absolutely great in this book, and this was like how to paint your Legion, and they go into like how to do paint the skeletons. So if like you have picked up any of the White Dwarfs, they have the paint splatter articles, and that's basically what this is. So they have sort of a paint splatter for how to do bone. Actually, it's a little different than I was taught or learned. You have zombie flesh, how to do that. How to do rusted blades, that was pretty interesting. How to make a banner. How to do the special brass. How to do the dire wolf flesh and fur. And again, there's several pages of this, so like I said, these paint spiders were pretty good. So they go through 8 steps on how to do a vampire's face, how to do balefire, how to do this petrified bone, and then how to do other special effects, as well as how to do the spirits. So then Death Ascendant basically talks again about the forces of death and how you would do your allegiance and your grand alliance and factions. And they have legions of Nagash, the Grand Host, the Legion of Sacrament, the Legion of Blood, and the Legion of Night. So here they talk about, this is basically if you're going to do an allegiance, a Grand Host of Nagash, you would have the battle traits and the artifacts of power that you could choose if you had a force for that. The Legion of Sacrament, each of these legions are going to get a separate command trait and artifacts that they can take. Same for Legion of Blood, command traits and artifacts. And finally, Legion of Night, traits and artifacts. So then they go into the lores of the dead, and there's basically the lore of the death mages and the lore of the vampires. And wizards know an additional spell from one of the lores of dead as described in the armies. And so basically you can choose one of these lores and you would know an additional spell. Vampire wizards must be generated from lore of vampires, and death mage wizards must come from the lore of the death mages. They also have a rule called the Locust of Shaish. So you make an unmodified casting roll of 9+ for a death wizard attempting to cast, and it's not unbound. After resolving the effects of your spell, you may immediately resolve them for a second time. And so like that means that, for example, you cast a Blade of Shaish, and the wizard summons a whirlwind of spirit blades to slice through enemies, It has a casting value of 5. It successfully casts roll a dice for each enemy unit within 12 inches of the caster. On a 5+, that unit suffers a mortal wound. So if you actually cast this spell and you rolled a 9 or more to cast it, you could actually double that, so you could choose 2 units and cast that spell. After the Lords of the Dead, they have the allegiance abilities for Soul Blight, if you're having a Soul Blight army. And I wanted to take a step back when they talk about like the Legion of Night. So the Legion of Night army may include any units in this Battletome apart from Nagash. Same for Legion of Blood, same for Legion of Sacrament. So you're building one of these armies, it's only the units that are in this Battletome. So you can't pull in other undead units from other Battletomes. And that would include Tomb Kings, unfortunately. So then they have the generic Allegiance of Death, and this is the same thing that you basically had before in, you know, just in the old Warhammer Grand Alliance Death book. So these are exactly the same. So then they got some battle plans. Looks like there's one here where the Legions of Nagash, 9-inch territory and 18 inches. And this one is one group commands a group of heroes from the Legions of Nagash, and their opponent commands an army encircling their position. The Legions of Nagash player may only select units with the hero keyword. That would be interesting. And so basically the enemy has you surrounded. Your forces are smashed. While you still stand, you can strike down the foe. The encircler has an objective of basically destroy the enemy before they escape. Battlefield type. Then there's another Ancient Warriors scenario. And there's a Legion of Nagash, Forest versus the Defender. Special abilities. The Legion of Nagash have a special ability in this one, and the Defender's command have a special command ability. And here they talk about ancient tombs, and I don't know, I've heard the rumors about these, if they're going to be a new model or what, or how these are going to work. But here they talk about how they're going to use ancient tombs in this scenario. At the end of each Legions of Nagash's player movement phase, if a death hero is within 3 inches of a cairn entrance, they may declare they will summon new forces from it. And so then you can get the D3 results and see what comes from these ancient mausoleums, ancient tombs. So next up they have, and I was kind of surprised to see this, but I think it's a really good idea. They have the Path to Glory campaign. So if you wanted to run basically Legion of Nagash in Path to Glory, they have the rules for how to do all of that. The warband tables and the champion reward tables and followers tables and even a roster. So that was very good to see. Next up they talk about how to just sort of how to use or think about Legion of Nagash, and they kind of give you an idea about how you wanted to, if you wanted to build or theme your army. They kind of give you some ideas for different themes of the army and where you could start with those. So then we get to the War Scrolls, and I'm sure this is where most people are curious about what's going on here. So first off, there are some battalions. So this battalion is basically Nagash and a unit of Morghast and 3 or more units of Skeleton Warriors, Graveguard, and Black Knights. Basically, so this is if he uses his Deathly Invocation ability, you can treat the D3 resolve as 3 automatically. And this one here, each time a wound or mortal wound is allocated in Nagash, you may pick a Morghast unit from this unit to take the wound instead. So Nagash is really going to be strong and tough to kill. And the cost of this battalion is 160 in match play. Next up we have the Legion of Sacrament, the Lord of Sacrament, which is basically Ark in the Black, 2 or more Necromancers, and a Mortis engine. And the cost of this is probably the cheapest battalion I've seen, and it's only 70 points. But basically, in your hero phase, each wizard from the Lord of Sacrament may cast an additional spell if they're within 6 inches of the mortis engine. And in the shooting phase, add 1 to save rolls of units from the Lord of Sacrament while they're in 6 inches of the mortis engine. Next up, we have a battalion, the Death March. It's got a White King and Black Knights and a unit of Grave Guard and 3 units of Skeleton Warriors. Next up is another Battletome, which is the Castellans of Crimson Keep, which is basically Prince Vordry and 3 or more units of Blood Knights. And the Prince Vordry is a new, basically vampire, named a vampire on a zombie dragon. The Court of Nulamia, another Battletome, which is Neferata, 2 or more vampire lords, and a Bloodseeker Palanquin. And this is another cheaper one. It's only cost 70 points, but it really doesn't have a lot of units that it's going to be affecting. And so basically, while she's within 9 inches of the battalion Palanquin, you may reroll failed to hit rolls for Neferata. And at the start of your movement phase, units from the Court of Nulamia are within 9 inches of the Palanquin and may add 4 inches to their movement. So, I mean, I just don't think that's really even worth 70 points. And finally, there's the Legion of Nightfall, and this guy in points is 140 points. And it's a Manford, 2 units of Argyce, and 3 or more units of Warriors. And basically, so any turn in which they complete a successful charge, add 1 to the attack characteristic of the Murderous Fangs and Talons of the battalions of Argyce. And that could be potentially true. Good. I'm not sure how many attacks they make, but you're going to be, you know, either 1 to 2 doubling it, or 2 to 3. All extra units, all extra attacks, always great. Call of the Night is, and so it's actually 2 or more units. So if you did a whole bunch of those, that would actually add up. And Call of the Night, if you use the Deathly Invocation ability, you may reroll the D3 result for the Deathly Invocation. So let's talk about Deathly Invocation, and we're going to start by looking just at this scroll here, which is Arkan the Black scroll. So a Deathly Invocation, basically, you can see that they've all the wizards got rid of summon. So they basically have, and all the units are no longer summon units. So if you see like zombies here are not, they don't have a spell to cast them to summon. Instead, they have this keyword called summonable. Okay, and Deathly Invocation actually affects units that are summonable. So basically, at the start of your hero phase, you can pick a number of units, and in Nagash, that's 5 units. Arkan's 4. A vampire with a White King is 2, and basically they get each unit that is summonable, the number of units that are within 18 inches of him. So if you pick, in this case it's Arkan, we can pick 4 units. We roll a D3 for each, and we can return a number of slain models to it that have combined wounds characteristic equal to or less than the D3. And so that's huge. Each of these guys it's going to make these armies with skeletons. If you have a D3, you know, so you can get 4 units of skeletons, each adding a D3 models back every turn. So what they've done is they've gone ahead and changed from summoning units to having this summonable keyword and having units return. And units that are returned to the battlefield via this method do not count points in match play. And that was one of the problems with Death before. You could summon up a ton of stuff, but nobody ever used it in match play because it cost points. And so it was like, am I going to put these guys on the board at the beginning or risk having to cast a spell to get them? And most time people just decided, I'm just going to put them at the beginning. I don't have points for summoning left. So I'm sure everybody wants to know about Nagash and what his, if he has any changes. And really there's not a lot of changes. I did go ahead and pull out the Death book to kind of do some comparisons here on some of these characters. And you can see we got the old Nagash here and the new Nagash. And so basically, you know, still 9, 16, 3, 10 bravery. And all of his attacks and everything are all the same. And the number of spells that he can cast and everything is the same. So, Staff of Power, Frightful Touch, also the same. He doesn't have, before this Death Magic Incarnate, he doesn't have, because the units are not summonable anymore. So this used to basically like when you would summon units via a spell, it would double the number of units, so you don't have that. But his Deathly Invocation is kind of making up for that. Nagash actually has 5 units. Warcane is the same, and the 9 books of Nagash are also basically the same. Lets him cast extra spells. Hand of Dust, Dull Steel are also the same, and the command ability, again, the same. So Nagash's ability really hasn't changed, other than this Deathly Invocation replacing Death Magic Incarnate. So let's look. Arkin the Black hasn't changed much. Neferata and Manfred, again, really, they become Mocharks, and they also have the Deathly Invocation. Manfred's 4, and Neferata is also 4. And they basically have the same abilities they had before. Prince Vordry is a single model, and this is the new sort of vampire on skeletal dragon or zombie dragon. And he has abilities, which he's got a Deathly Invocation of 3, and he's got a special charge, he's got a special breath weapon, and he is a wizard and also knows this Quick Blood spell. Quick Blood has a casting value of 7, and if cast, you can add 1 to hit and wound rolls for the caster until your next hero phase. So pretty much he's going to be able to get to add 1 to his to hit and wound rolls, which would make him 2+ to hit, 2+ to wound, Ren -2 with his lance, which is just going to be, wow, that's going to be a lot. So it says Quick Blood has a casting value of 6/7, and if successfully cast, add 1 to the hit and wound rolls for the caster. So I assume it's not really on Shademayer's attacks. So that's kind of an interesting question. I wonder if they'll clarify that, if his mount is affected by Quick Blood, or if it's just him, because it does say caster, but a lot of times things are models, and this is an entire model. So I have a feeling it really is just his blood lance. So we get into the Morghasts. You get a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, and again, he's got a Deathly Invocation of 3. And all these Deathly Invocations, if you have a bunch of these heroes that have that, they're all going to add up. So you can have multiple Deathly Invocations. It's not a hero ability that goes during like the command phase. It's just at the start of your turn it happens. So we get into Blood Knights, Bargheists, Bat Swarms, Fell Bats, and they really haven't changed other than these guys are getting this keyword summonable. They don't, but these guys do. And that's important later. Well, these keywords summonable, these guys can actually get affected by the Deathly. So we get the Vampire Lord, who's got a Deathly Invocation of 3. He pretty much stays the same. Bloodseeker Palanquin, Mortis Engine, and Coven Throne. Mortis Engine and Coven Throne don't look like they're special characters, so they're not going to have the death. Oh, I'm sorry. The Coven Throne does have the Deathly Invocation, but the Mortis Engine does not. So the Necromancer is one that is kind of a big change. I'll try and go through it here real fast. Maybe it's only me with my Tomb King attitude. So his stats are basically going to be the same, and this one has the undead minions. And this basically said for each time a model suffers a wound or mortal wound and there is another death unit from your with army, you can roll the die, and on a 4 or more, you can ignore that wound and give it to a death unit instead. Now over here, it gets specific and says that it has to be a summonable unit. So it's not just any death unit before. I mean, you could have done it on one of your Morghasts if you needed to keep this guy alive, or a high wound thing, or something that regenerated or something. And so now it's specific to be just these summonable units. And the other big change with this is the Van Hell's Dance Macabre spell. And again, it used to be on a skeleton mordant, which is basically their flesh eater core, and zombie units. And now it only works on summonable units. So this is a big change because, you know, kind of as a Tomb King player, that I would pull in a necromancer as an ally, and he would have the ability to cast Van Hells, and Van Hells could be cast on my skeletons because they were just a skeleton unit. So any of the skeletons in the Tomb King army, and give them extra attacks. And so that was big, and that's been taken away from them. There's kind of an interesting question I'm thinking about, because the FAQ, the official Games Workshop Age of Sigmar FAQ, says if there are 2 scrolls for a model, you are allowed to use whichever one you want. So as a Tomb King player, I would always choose this one instead of this one. I wonder how tournaments like Adepticon and such are going to handle that little particular thing when you get into these little nuances. So Van Hells, that's a big change in my opinion, because it's not just any skeleton unit, so it doesn't affect a lot of things that it used to affect before. Corpse Cart, zombies, they're pretty much the same. You got the Terrorgeist and the Zombie Dragon. The White King, and you can see the White King, he has a Deathly Invocation, but he only affects 2 units. If the model uses this command ability on any Death Rattle unit within 18 inches, add 1 to the attack characteristic of that unit's melee weapon. So that's actually interesting. It's kind of weird because Death Rattle, when you go back to Tomb Kings, your skeletons are Death Rattle. And so this would continue to work. And so maybe you would have to summon that, ally that guy in instead, depending on what rulings are. So finally got Skeletal Warriors. And this is pretty much the same. You got the Legion when there's 20 or more models. Add 1 to the attack characteristic, and add 2 if there are 30 or more models. So this guy's got 1 attack. If you have 30 models, they're going to get 3 attacks. If you have a White King giving them the command ability, they're going to get an additional 1 attack, so they're going to have 4 attacks with 30 models. And you'll look in the back, the points, they're actually discounted when you actually take all 30 models. Cairn Wraith and Tomb Banshees, pretty much the normal there. Hex Wraith, I guess I wanted to point out Hex Wraith actually gains the word summonable, and so Hex Wraiths are affected by the Deathly Invocation. Spirit Hosts, also summonable. Dire Wolves, also summonable. And then we have the points, and that's it. But let me go through actually what was a change. So summonable units: Bat Swarm, Fell Bats, Zombies, Black Knights, Graveguard, Skeleton Warriors, Spirit Hosts, Dire Wolves, and the Hex Wraith. What's not summonable? What was lost in this? The Flesh Eater core. I don't think they're summonable. I don't have that book, but I think the new keyword summonable is just for this book, and so they would not be affected by this. And again, the Van Hells no longer works on skeleton, and so skeleton heroes with the keyword skeleton, the corpse card, Flesh Eater core again, because they were zombies, it doesn't affect them because they're not summonable, and any Tomb Kings. So that's kind of it. I think these points stayed the same. Again, this is Greg with the Dice Must Flow. If you can, take a chance, go ahead and like this video. If you like this type of content, like my channel, subscribe, and I'll try and keep bringing it to you. So that's it for today. We'll talk to you later. Thanks.